So back again, still in chapter 3. So now we're going to look at the kind of analysis that you need to do when you're looking at a business-to-business sale. So the first thing you look at is some connections. Who are the internal players within the business that you need to target? And what kind of suppliers does the business have currently suppliers that you're targeting? Suppliers that compete with you that the business is currently using. And then characteristics of the organization that you're dealing with. And we'll talk about those in some depth, and then something called derived demand, which you may or may not know about, but we'll talk about that in this segment. So internal players, we need to know who's initiating a decision. So what does that mean? Who decides that we need to think about acquiring something? So if we were talking about, let's say, a ship, might be the chief engineer or the chief mate who might initiate a decision for some new piece of equipment on a ship. New piece of navigation gear. Might also be the captain, depending on how the ship is structured. New piece of equipment in the engine room or some kind of mechanical equipment might come from the chief engineer. So the idea of a new piece of equipment, make the ship more efficient, make the ship safer, make the ship something, would come from perhaps from one of the operating people, either on the deck or engine side. The idea for a decision, an internal player within the business, might be the people who actually use your product. So that would be the deck or engine people. Who evaluates the alternatives? So let's say we have a request for some new piece of navigation equipment. Who makes the evaluation between which pieces of or which options for new navigation equipment we should acquire? There may be more than one supplier who decides or evaluates the alternatives. And then the finance department usually controls the release of funds. So we may come up with a great idea, but finance might say, no, we don't have the funds to do that right now. We're going to have to postpone that, or there's some more important things we have to spend money on. So suppliers, who is currently supplying my target market, and what kind of relationships do they have with my potential customers? So this is different from the consumer, where you've got many buyers. When you're dealing business to business, you generally have fewer buyers. Changes your marketing process, changes what you're trying to do, and may change the way that you communicate. There's a lot more person-to-person selling, for instance, in business to business than there is in business to consumer marketing. So we'd like to know, does our potential customer already have a long-term contract with somebody to provide what we're trying to provide? That may mean that we probably don't want to target them. They've already signed up on a long-term basis with someone. We'd have to work really hard to get them to break that contract or abrogate that contract. Are they satisfied or dissatisfied with their current supplier? If they're satisfied, we're going to have to offer more to get them to change than if they're dissatisfied. And are their suppliers meeting their needs, and what don't their suppliers meet? What needs don't their suppliers meet? So you're looking for a place, a niche, a way to get in the door with a business-to-business supplier, a business-to-business customer, and they tend to be more rational, and they also have ongoing needs, so they tend to have ongoing suppliers. So you can flip this around. If you already have a customer, you can say, it makes it more difficult for me to lose this customer if I have a long-term contract. If they're happy with me, so they're satisfied, it's less likely that somebody's going to take my business away. And if I'm meeting my customers' needs, all of them, or as many as possible, then it's less likely that I'll lose the customer. They're not even going to go looking if you've met all those needs as a supplier. So if you're on the inside, you've already got a customer, and a way to keep them is to look at this same chart. How do I keep my customers? We want to know about the characteristics of the companies we're looking at. How big are they? What business are they in? What industry are they in? Is that industry growing, and how much of a market share do they have in that industry? How competitive is the situation in their business? Are they really cost conscious because it's incredibly competitive? Or are they in a more dominant position where they may be, where cost may not be quite as key an element in any purchase decision? What kind of policies and procedures do they have for buying? Lots of different companies have lots of different procedures. If you want to sell to a company, you need to know their procedures. If you want to sell to the government, you need to know their procedures. They're quite onerous. You get lots of paperwork to do before you're allowed to even bid on a contract with the government. Financial constraints. Are they struggling financially? So are they constrained financially or not? And when do they do their buying? And that's a really important question, because companies have buying cycles, especially for larger investment type pieces of equipment as opposed to day-to-day supplies. So buying cycles, when are they buying? When do they make their major capital equipment decisions to buy a new piece of navigation equipment, or to upgrade their engine room controls, or whatever it might be that they're doing on a ship or in any other business? When do they make those decisions? They probably have a cycle, and at certain times in the cycle they're doing certain part of that decision making. So you need to know what their cycle is. Generally, when you're selling to businesses, if they're in the manufacturing or wholesale or retail side, you're selling to the business, but the demand is coming from the consumer. So they don't create the demand. The demand is coming from somewhere else, and they're satisfying the demand. So your demand for your product is going to be predicated on how much the consumer demands. So you have to think about that, and we'll talk about that a little later. So if I'm selling steel to, make it even easier, if I'm selling tires as an original equipment manufacturer to an automaker, how many tires are they going to buy from me? Are they going to buy as many as they need for the cars they make? How many cars are they going to make? Depends on how many they're going to sell. So they're not going to make, at least for very long, they're not going to make lots more cars than they can sell. So the tire demand, the number of tires that they're going to demand from me, is predicated on how many cars they sell. So that's an example of derived demand. Most consumer goods marketers do what's called multi-tier marketing. They sell to intermediaries, like retailers and wholesalers, and they also sell to consumers. So think about Skippy peanut butter. Their customer is a supermarket chain, like locally, the Hannaford supermarket chain, locally in Maine here. So they're selling to the retailer, Hannaford, but they also have to create demand with the consumer who buys the peanut butter. So they have to market to two different markets at the same time. Now, the case that you're doing, that you're starting to work on this week, is a business-to-business case, but it's a consumer product. So you have to think about that when you're looking at the case. What is the marketing issue? We're selling to consumers indirectly through retailers and or wholesalers. So we have to market to both. So we have two-tier marketing. And business-to-business marketers often do the same thing, because they may go through intermediaries, wholesalers, distributors, or manufacturers' reps. So plumbing manufacturers, plumbing supply manufacturers, people who make, let's say, faucets, they sell those faucets to plumbing distributors, who then sell them to plumbing installers, so plumbing companies. They also sell them to big box stores like Home Depot or Lowe's, who'd sell them to consumers. So if I'm Delta Faucets, I'm selling my product to intermediaries, who are then marketing it to end users But some of those products go directly to businesses. So if I'm they get installed by, Toll Homes or a big construction company building high rises in the city. So some of it's going directly to businesses, but it's also going through an intermediary. It's going through a wholesaler, a plumbing wholesaler. So there's lots of different chains that are going on here, channels that are going on, and you have to think about that when you're doing this kind of stuff. I think most of you have done some research in this program or in others. Should know that there are two types of research, secondary and primary. Secondary means you're using somebody else's research and just gathering it and analyzing it. Primary means you're going out and acquiring the information. So two kinds of research for marketing, just as there are for any other research type field. For marketing, some of the best sources for secondary research are listed here. I'm not going to go through them, but these are sources for secondary research. In addition, the Maine Maritime Library has a couple of databases, business databases, that may have these sources for secondary research. And since the head librarian is in your class, I'm sure you can ask Wendy Gervin for information about what the library might provide. You do have access to all that through your Canvas. You have access to all the electronic information in the MMA library and across Maine, as a matter of fact, all the academic libraries. Secondary research, you got to be careful. If it's on the internet, it doesn't mean it's true, and I'm sure you all know that. But think about that. You want to make sure, check dates and sources, make sure that there's some credibility for your source. Wikipedia is generally not a creditable source. Might be a link to getting to some creditable sources. It's often quite useful, but generally not considered creditable. Definitely research sources cited in whatever information you find to make sure that it's been interpreted correctly. And be definitely careful about applying generalized information to your specific situation. A lot of people take general information and apply it. It doesn't usually work. Primary research. First of all, what do we need and how are we going to use it? And we can collect that information in lots of different ways. Observations, surveys, experiments. We'll talk a little bit about some specific marketing type research. Primary research is more expensive than secondary research. So it requires, you have to fit it into your marketing budget if you're going to do primary research, because it will add up pretty fast in cost. So you only want to use primary research when the information isn't available from secondary research, or it's very specific to your needs. It's definitely worth doing, especially in many marketing situations, if you want to do the research so that you don't waste a lot of money launching a product that isn't going to be successful. So that's very expensive. So primary research can be a good investment to determine whether your product should be launched and how it should be launched. One method of primary research that's used quite a bit by marketers is focus groups. Marketing companies and marketers bring in small groups of customers. They have a guided discussion. It's often observed not just by the people in the room, but maybe by people in a remote room through a TV monitor or a one-way glass or something like that. And it helps you understand how customers are thinking. So if you're developing a new TV ad for the upcoming Super Bowl, you've probably done focus groups. You've probably showed various versions of the ad to consumers who fit into the demographic target that you're looking at, and see how they react to it. Do they remember it 5 minutes later? Do they understand the message? What do they see in the ad? That kind of thing. So companies will do that kind of focus group research. The downside of it is you're only testing a few people, so statistically it's not very valid. So you have to be careful that it doesn't really represent the whole market, but it does give you some insight. And I can give you an example. When I was running some retail operations in Boston, one of our strategic partners was the ski company Salomon, which was a French company, and at the time was an independent French company. It's since been acquired by Adidas, so it's owned by Adidas now, I believe. But at the time, it was owned by Georges Salomon, who was the son of the founder. And initially, they just made ski bindings. Didn't make skis or boots, which they do now, and other things, clothing as well. But at the time, they were just a ski binding manufacturer, and they were contemplating entering the boot market initially, and they wanted to talk to customers. And we were their sort of strategic partner on the East Coast. So they called us up and said, we'd like to do some focus groups. Would you pull together 8 or 10 of your, they described the kind of customer they wanted. In this case, it was sort of high-end customers who were avid skiers and who had a fair amount of financial resources so they could afford product, and also early adopters, people who like to do new things. So we did that, and they provided dinner and flew Georges Salomon and his marketing staff in from France, and we spent an evening with these people. They learned a lot. They did a focus group with us in Boston. They did one in Aspen, Colorado, and they did one in San Francisco on this trip. And much of what was discussed in the focus group ended up in the product. They really listened. They did this again a few years later when they decided to get into making actual skis. So they did bindings, then they did boots, and then they did skis. They were quite successful with these launches, and all of this product was developed internally within their business. Their competitors also wanted to become integrated ski manufacturers, ski boot and binding manufacturers, and acquired other companies. So Rossignol acquired a boot company and acquired a binding company. So they went the acquisition route, Salomon went the internally developed route, and I think we're quite successful at it. In fact, they were very successful. They gained significant market share in each market they went into, and have maintained that market share over time. So that's a use of focus groups, not representative certainly. Boston and high-end folks who like to be early adopters, but they listened to them and they went after the high-end people first, and then they took it down from there over time to get to the larger market, not just the top-end market. Behavioral research, something that happens a lot. This mostly happens with observation of customers in various situations. If you want to, go to YouTube and type in Paco Underhill, and you'll find a few films. He runs a behavioral research marketing firm and publishes a couple of things on YouTube to stimulate interest in his research. So there are a couple of interesting videos out there you might want to look at. There are others out there, I'm sure, and he's very, very well known in the field. But observing customer behavior in actual situations. So understand how people are choosing product, even to where you want to put it on the shelf, or we can test a new color box and see how people react to it by watching them. You may or may not know that, well, I'll ask the question, and obviously I can't hear your answers, but which way do people turn when they walk into a retail store? Well, something like 98% of people turn right naturally. They don't look left. They don't go left. They look right and turn right. So if you're a retailer, you set up your store so that people come in and go right, because they're going to do that anyway. So you want to put your impulse items, things that are exciting and interesting and people might buy just because they see them, to the right of the front door. So if you go into a grocery store, look the next time you go into a grocery store. Most grocery stores have their fresh produce immediately to the right when you enter the store. There are two reasons for this. One is everybody goes right. Fresh produce is the highest profit margin product within a grocery store. And it's also the highest impulse item. People buy fresh groceries because they look good. So they buy strawberries or they buy lettuce because it's attractive and it looks good. If you get them when they first come into the store, their cart isn't full, they haven't spent more money than they meant to yet, and they're much more likely to impulse buy in the fresh fruit, fresh vegetable area. So that's what supermarkets do. So where you put stuff in stores matters, what level of the shelf they're on, how high they are, how low they're, high level, kids level, all of those things matter, and that's all behavioral research. Make sure when you're doing setting up your research that that you can fit it into your budget. It's definitely part of your budget, and primary is definitely more expensive than secondary. And you can also, and usually do, use research to evaluate how your implementation is going. So we're implementing this, how's it working? And you can use both, well, primarily primary research to examine how you're doing as you implement. That's usually internally generated data, so primary research. So you want the best available, affordable, and affordable is key there, information. You have to do a cost-benefit analysis to decide if it's worth getting the information relative to what it costs. Generally speaking, you're not going to have 100% or perfect information in any decision. And there may be more than one correct decision. And when you're using marketing research, you may not get the clearest answer. And then finally, if you do primary research, you have to be concerned with privacy concerns, so you can't violate privacy concerns. No video cameras in the dressing room, just to see how people are trying things on. I can tell you, and maybe we'll get a chance, there are ways that you can track what goes on in the dressing room, but it's not with videos. And it's not with peepholes either. Somebody said that in the audience, I'm sure, but it's not. You can track electronically which garments get tried on and not bought, and which garments get tried on and get bought. And there are ways to track that electronically with tags. And we might have a chance to talk about that later. So that's kind of wraps up the marketing research part. I'd emphasize, as you start your case, remember there's often more than one correct decision in a case. And the case might suggest some decisions, but that doesn't mean you have to agree with them. So various people in the case might suggest that this is one option or the option that they support. That doesn't necessarily mean it's the right option. It's just like the real world. If you're sitting in a position where you have to make a decision, and somebody from one department says this is what you should do, and somebody from another department has a different opinion, one or the other might be right, or there might be a third way that's better than either of the suggested decisions. So make sure you keep an open mind when you're doing your case. Thanks very much. There's a couple of questions following this, and that wraps it up for week 3. Thanks.